Good afternoon, morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Jason's Take On podcast series. We've got myself, Jason Noble, here in London just before a long bank holiday weekend here, which we're all looking forward to, and my co-host, Mr. Whitehead, over in the States. Say hello, Jason.
Hi, everyone. Great to have you join us here. Thank you for joining us again.
It's been a couple of weeks since we've done our last podcast, but we are super excited today to be with a guest that most of you, I'm sure, know. We're going to talk about the good old topic of customer success operations and the criticality of that to businesses, where it's come from. And we've got the one and only Chris Hicken from nuffsaid. So Chris is the co-founder and CEO of nuffsaid. I am sure the majority of our listeners know you, Chris. You and I have spoken before, had some great conversation. You are a very well-respected member of the customer success community. You're one of the top 100 customer success strategies, I think last year, and I think at least this year as well. You're a huge advocate amongst the customer success leadership community. And you guys as a business are doing some amazing things. And I know you've published some awesome articles recently on this. So Chris, a huge welcome to you and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, we are huge fans of the two of you in the show. So very happy to be and delighted to be included. And thank you for allowing me to attend. And I think customer success ops is a super interesting topic. So I'm very excited to get into the details.
I can't wait. It's something that I think we're just going to have such a really, we said we did the prep for this, just a really cool conversation, because it's one of those topics that is even newer than customer success and still developing. I think a lot of businesses struggle with where does it sit? What does it mean? But before we do that, Chris, can I get you to give a kind of a more formal introduction to everyone so they know a bit more about yourself, background, and what you're doing right now?
Sure. Yeah, let's keep it short. So Chris Hicken, I'm one of 3 co-founders at nuffsaid. We're building an AI-powered brain that helps customer success teams focus on work that matters. And of course, in customer success, the work that matters is identifying customers who aren't getting value and then helping them get to value more quickly. So the brain helps you do that. Before nuffsaid, I was president and COO of a company called UserTesting, which is an enterprise software company that helps companies develop world-class customer experiences. So my background is all around, I've lived and breathed customer experience for 10 plus years now. It's a passion of mine, something I'm really good at. So I'm kind of bringing the best of what I've learned in that part of my journey over into nuffsaid, into the customer success.
Super exciting. I love that kind of background and seeing how you can do better things with this. But before we dive into the topic of the podcast, then, what about your journey into nuffsaid? I mean, was the kind of co-founder there? What was it that took you to see this opportunity and need to create what you guys are doing now?
Well, the broadest version of this company is that people are overwhelmed with information and communication at work, and the brain just isn't good at processing email, chat, LinkedIn, updates, newsletters, Salesforce, Jira, all the different places we have to go. The brain isn't good at looking at all these different things, customers, and figuring out what's the 1 or 2 things that I can spend time on right now to move the needle for my job. And you see this more and more as companies grow. People are very busy, and many times they're putting in lots of hours, but they're not working on the things that matter. They're not working on the things that will move the company forward. So the original idea for the company was, can you build software that understands who people are at work and what their goals are, and then allow the brain, the intelligence engine, to do the things that the human brain isn't good at, and help people to figure out, okay, what are those, when I sit down at my desk today, what are the 3 things I have to get done? So that's the original vision for the product. And in doing research into the enterprise, we discovered there were 6 departments that were really good candidates for this AI-powered brain. And for a number of reasons, which we can go into in a different conversation, we decided to focus on customer retention first, customer success managers and account managers.
I think the way you've described that kind of describes how my brain works, and it is that it's a huge problem I think we've all got, and there is so much data coming at us today that everyone's looking for that way of fixing this, and having the solutions that you guys are pretty critical.
Yeah, and I think if I could double click on this a little bit more, I feel like the productivity tools software category has failed us in many ways. And what I mean by that is productivity apps, a lot of the focus has been get more things done more efficiently. But if you look at if you look at your desktop computer, your workspace, your workflow, your data is now spread across probably a dozen different tools. So you've got communication, data, workflow happening all these different places, it's no wonder it's difficult for people to focus. And so it's going to take a new way of thinking to break us out of the productivity mold that we've been conditioned to work in for the last decade.
Absolutely. I think you picked on something that is super critical. It's like you're looking at my desktop, you know exactly what I've got here. As we dive into the topic of Csops now, you published an article recently about why Csops is the secret weapon behind the future of customer success. Could you tell us a bit more about the article and then also about the collaboration behind it as well? Because it's quite a few other people that you worked with on that.
Yeah, so when nuffsaid publishes pieces, we don't sit in an ivory tower and dictate how the world should work. All of our pieces are super well researched. We work with members of the community, people who we believe to be really excellent operators in their, kind of core functional areas. And so we recently published a piece on customer success ops and all the different facets of it, meaning what it owns, how it matures over time, who it reports to, et cetera. And that was done in combination with customer success leaders, lots of customer success operations folks, CS ops leaders, CS ops individuals. And so the piece is a summary of what we heard from the community and kind of the state of customer success ops as it is today. This piece may not be relevant a couple years from now, but at least today, I think it's a very good reflection of what is happening in the world, in the CS ops world today.
I reread the article this morning, thought it was fantastic, and we'll include a link to it in the show notes below, so thanks for that. One of the things that you said at the sort of the preamble that I really enjoyed was the future of customer success, which we refer to as 2.0, requires leaders to spend less time running a better success team, instead focusing on using customer data to run a better company. And I just thought that was so impactful and powerful. What are you finding right now in terms of how many people are actually using their data to run a better company versus just to run a better success team? And how do you see that shifting in the near future?
I'd say there's a very small handful of very powerful CCOs that are using data to drive a better company. The majority of us, though, are still in 1.0 mode, which is let's run a better customer success team, which means better playbooks, better product usage data, better health scores, better onboarding. That's where all of us are spending our time today, even though most of the factors that impact the customer experience and ultimately churn are happening outside of customer success. So it's their experience with the product. It's was the wrong use case pitched in the sales process? Is pricing set incorrectly? There's all these other factors that actually impact the customer's willingness to retain competitors. And so those things aren't broadly influenced by the customer success team today. However, the most kind of powerful and thoughtful CCOs are doing this already. And I think maybe the thing for customer success leaders to focus on right now is that if customer success does not step up into a role where it's influencing the whole company, there are other executives that are seeing this as a problem and they're starting to rebrand themselves as CCO. So for example, I've seen several examples of CROs who have retitled themselves as CCO to help solve this problem because they feel like they have the kind of power of personality and reach and influence to go solve this for the company.
Wow.
I think that's incredible learning there. And it's something that I think because the idea of the CCO role here, we've seen a lot of growth in that role in the States and it's beginning to happen here, but a lot slower. And I wonder if that's that trend there with them being internal roles that reposition themselves rather than brand new roles. I wonder if that's actually how this will go. And it's a very interesting way to look at it because I think I've seen organizations where the head of your CS org reports into the head of commercial. It might be your chief commercial officer or your chief revenue officer, but that person doesn't understand customer success to the same extent. And seeing that opportunity, I can see that really shifting and causing some really interesting and different dynamics. And potentially, if you're bringing in more leaders that have got that sales experience into CS and running as the exec that was responsible for the customer part of the business, does it bring with it that more needed commercial side of the business, which is really
let's double click on this concept of dynamics before we're talking about titles and who owns what. The dynamics that are driving this are that the investors now really care about retention rates, which was not the case before. And what I mean by that is if you look at public, at least American public companies, 9 out of 10 of the top public SaaS companies report retention rates as part of their 10Ks, their annual reports. If you go talk to top investors at private equity funds, Vista Equity Partners, or top venture capital funds, Sequoia, Excel, they're all looking at retention rates as one of the key value driving metrics for what kind of valuation they're going to put on the company. So you've got this new world where retention rate is now a board level topic. It's a board level metric. And the expectation now is that there's a customer leader. There's someone at the company who is obsessively focused on retention rate and all the different facets of it. And so what the market is saying is, we just need a more powerful customer leader right now because this metric matters so much in determining the value of a business. So I think that's the dynamics that are driving this kind of change in the marketplace, where CCOs either have to step up and change, or other leaders in the organization are going to do it instead.
Yeah, very true. And I thought it was interesting in your article as well, too, how you talked about the maturity of CS ops and where it goes and at what point does it come out of the CS department and report to a bigger organizational imperative. And I think that feeds into it. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you found and what you're recommending there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different decisions that companies have to make around where it reports and how it's structured. The first one, maybe the more important one, is should CS ops be a centralized or decentralized function? And if it's decentralized, what you're saying is that each department at the company will have their own ops function that reports to them. So there's going to be a sales ops, a marketing ops, a CS ops, a dev ops, a people ops. The centralized concept is saying, okay, well, let's combine at least some or maybe all of those ops functions into a single group. So a centralized group could be, let's pull CS ops and sales ops in together into one, let's call it sales ops. Or let's combine sales, CS, and marketing together and let's call it rev ops. That's actually increasingly popular at companies, mid-sized companies in the States. Or let's actually combine all of them together under the COO or under an ops leader. And now all of the ops functions in the company are reporting to a single executive. There are some pretty strong pros and cons of each. There's literally no silver bullet. In fact, we've spoken to CS ops leaders, CS leaders, and there are pretty strong cons to each choice. But if you decide to centralize, let's start with decentralized first. Let's say CS ops reports into the CCO. There's no connection to sales ops or other ops teams. Obviously, from a CCO's perspective, they really like this because they have fantastic visibility on what's going on with the CS ops teams. They completely control that team's focus, full control over which tools their team uses, and they can quickly spool up new initiatives without having to get other leaders bought in. If you talk to CS ops people, though, in this type of environment, they oftentimes don't like reporting to the CCO. And the reason is they feel when they are disconnected from other ops teams, they feel like they don't have opportunities to learn from what's going on with other ops teams. They also feel like they have a hard time getting things done in systems that they don't own. So a typical one is Salesforce. A CS ops person never owns Salesforce, and they have a really hard time working with sales ops to get things done quickly, because obviously the sales ops team, not because there's no nefarious reasons behind it, but sales ops has to prioritize the needs of the sales. So that's the decentralized view. And when you start centralizing, what typically happens is CS ops either reports to rev ops, which reports to CRO, or CS ops reports into a centralized ops function, which reports into COO. And we can go into the details of each of those as well. Again, each of those has strong pros, but also some pretty strong cons as well.
I think it's really interesting to see the maturity of the operations side of it and this kind of focus on, as you say, rev ops, commercial ops, and businesses really investing in it. And I think for a lot of organizations I've worked with, you see it starting, I've seen it start in sales and then sales ops come out of it and then the other ones come. But I've also seen it start with CS ops. So sales ops doesn't exist, marketing ops doesn't exist. So it's really interesting that depending on the maturity of the organization, you're seeing it start in different areas. And I like the idea that there are multiple ways of doing it, because one way I saw in one organization not too long ago was it reporting in ultimately to the COO, and it became this centralized function, all of the operate, and that worked really well. But I think a lot of that was specific to that business, specific to the personality of the COO. It worked well. You could easily see it not working well, as you've said, when you should have the decentralized model.
I would say that, let's just, rule of thumb. This is not true for every company, but rule of thumb is small companies have CSOps report into CCO. Mid-size or maybe late mid-stage companies, CSOps is part of RevOps, which reports to CRO. And then for every enterprise that we interviewed, CSOps is part of a centralized ops function which reports to COO.
Do you see that model causing any challenges for the CS leader in the organization who's not at C-level? So does that model introduce any delays, any frustrations in processes and data for the CS team?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The cons of, so let's say CSOps reports into a centralized ops team. There's a bunch of problems that come up. The needs of the ops team oftentimes can supersede the needs of the customer success team. The ops leader will have their own priorities. For example, this quarter, we're going to centralize all of our data warehousing tools together into one. And so all the ops teams will have to work on that. The CS leader feels like they have frustration around the lack of control they have over the CS ops function. And CS ops can push back or say no to things that CS wants to work on. CS has less control over the tools that they use because the tools are controlled by a centralized ops leader. And in some cases, happens less frequently, but in some cases, because the CS ops team is not as embedded in customer success, they can lose sight of the customer journey, the customer pain. And so they become disconnected from the customer, which can hurt the overall quality of experience that the CS ops team can deliver.
Chris, as I'm listening to you as well, and having read the article, I'm curious. I imagine there's a lot of differences across organizations in terms of what's actually included in CS ops and what remains in the CS team itself, especially as you get migrating around. Can you let us know a little bit what you typically see are the things that get included in ops that might get sent to report to different groups outside of the customer success leader? What typically stays in CS, and what are some of the main functions there, such as tools and processes versus having analytics and a data expert, data scientist maybe remain in the CS team and things like that, just to level set expectations around how this actually shapes out in practical terms.
Sure. I would say a mature customer success ops team owns, let's talk about the categories first. Standardization, so how the team works. Intelligence, think about reporting, health scores, etc. Planning, so this is both CS team and ops planning. Think of things like territory planning, career laddering, right? So all those types of planning. Headcount planning, process execution, risk management process, the renewal process, etc. Tools, tool deployment and maintenance. And then the best CS ops teams also own strategy, or at least they're thought partners to the CS ops, so to the CCO. So those are the kind of the functional buckets of what CS ops could own when it's mature. But of course, depending on the size of the company and the maturity of the CS ops org, usually in the early days, CS ops will own a very small subset of that, and then they'll add new responsibilities as they level up and mature and as the company's needs grow. So we could talk about that in detail, but I think at least this gives a sense of the starting point of the scope of what the role could be.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because I know a lot of our listeners are also folks who are heads at small, medium organizations that don't even have a dedicated ops team or even an ops person yet. You're trying to think of what is this and where do I need to go and how do I start on this journey?
So let's answer that question then for everybody. You typically onboard your first CS ops person when there's an acute need to be solved, and oftentimes that acute need comes around software. And so you'll say something like, I'm ready for a gain site or a churn zero, and I need to deploy it, and I can't take a whole CSM away from their responsibilities to go implement this thing. So that's oftentimes the trigger point to bring on the first CS ops team. But other pain points could be like, for example, We want to do more automation on the low touch customer base. And so we need someone who understands software well enough to put in place this automation. So that's typically the starting. So CSOps in the early days often owns tool deployment and maintenance. And then very quickly after that, they're given responsibilities around process execution. Let's set up an NPS survey program, or let's put in place a very strict renewal operations program, or let's set up a structured onboarding program. The kind of process related stuff oftentimes also goes to CSOps in the early days.
I think this is something that I saw exactly this at one of the organizations I've been with. Is we had a very good CS team, as in CSMs, but everyone doing their own thing, inconsistent, no standard playbooks. And there was one guy that actually didn't enjoy the job and wanted to move to be a more business analyst type role, and actually perfect timing, transitioned into the CS ops person role for that. And it was perfect because his background, what he liked doing was around process, and he was really key about putting together the data, standardize it, setting up NPS surveys, implementing the tool. And it really came on to be something really strong, and then actually started working closer with sales, took on then a lot of the sales ops functionality himself, and his role very quickly expanded after he settled into it. But it had not been created intentionally to start with. It became a very natural thing to move into, and just were a gap at the time that we needed to fill, which worked really well.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting the need to have the initial sales ops person be a naturally process-oriented and analytical personality type.
So Chris, I'm curious, what other traits do you see as being key for someone who's going to really excel as a COps person? Because when you talk about owning tools and processes and things, sometimes that sounds very different to me than the skill set for folks who really understand customers and working closely with them. And also sounds, very analytical with data. Sounds very different than someone who's really got that strategic view of things as well too, sometimes. So I'm just trying to understand what is the key things to really driving a successful CS ops person and team.
So that initial person, of course, needs to be very kind of process-oriented, detail-oriented, and analytical. But of course, as the CS ops team matures, the type of person that you need to hire will change dramatically. So I'll give you an example. One of the people we interviewed for this article, Zaina Marcotte at LinkedIn, her customer success ops team is 30 plus people strong. So you can imagine the roles are varied. Some people are really good with coming up with systems. Other people are very technical and are good at implementing tools. They're almost engineers, so they're very good at going in and writing code. Other people are great strategists, so they're good at uncovering insights from data and helping to drive goal setting, advocating for the product, and they're good at doing those types of things. And other folks are good at forecasting and planning. So I think there's not really a silver bullet personality type for a mature CS ops team. If you're thinking about solving that first CS ops hire, probably safe to go with someone who is naturally good at putting in place, developing and incrementing and improving processes, and also someone who's very analytical, who can look at a report and help figure out the one thing that matters from a report and help you get to the insights quickly.
I love it, because the kind of job spec almost, and this ideal person, it is like a CSM, and it's so wide in terms of what we need them to do. And I do think you're right that you find certain people that just fit into it and pick it up really well. What would you, if a business, particularly on the smaller scale, when it's a startup organization, they're starting to think about this, but they're struggling to get buy-in, investment for kind of growing it or building the function, how do you go about best advocating internally with your internal stakeholders, your execs, that there is a need for this?
Yeah, I would say there's differing levels of maturity on how to ask for budget for customer success. It's probably a losing battle to try to make the case for just one customer success ops hire. Here's maybe I'll take a step back and talk about how budget asks maturing CCO. Where things usually start is the CCO makes an agreement with the CFO that they get to hire a new CSM for every $2 million in revenue managed, or for every 100 customers managed. The problem with this, of course, is the CFO looks at CS as just a cost function. So it's like, how can I squeeze that team as hard as I can so every year they become a little bit more efficient? So it's a losing battle to approach it that way. The next, the more mature way to do that is to say, okay, look, if you give me an extra $500,000 in budget, I will return to the business $1 million in retention rate improvements. So CFO, where else are you going to put $500,000 to get that kind of return? That's more mature.
To speak the CFO's language.
Oh, it is. And the most mature way, which speaks to the truly speaks to the heart of the CFO and the CEO, is to say, give me an extra $500,000 and I will return a retention rate improvement that will grow company valuation by $30 million.
Nice. Back to your point of the investors and what they're looking at.
And it's what investors are looking at, it's what the CEO is looking at, it's what honestly, and ultimately it's what how the CFO is judged on the quality of their work. So going in and just asking for more budget for a Csops person, a losing battle. There's not much of an argument there. I think the better approach for the CS leader is to say, look, what impact am I going to commit to the company? And then don't bother me, CFO. I will decide how to deploy that cash to maximize the return to the business. But going and like fiddling with $50,000 or $100,000 here or there with the CFO, it's a losing battle. It puts you into a position where you have to ask permission to make the smallest operational changes to your organization, and you lose the freedom to run the business the way that you see fit. So I'd actually just say, as a general rule, I would argue against try and advocate for this role on an individual basis.
That way of thinking, I love, because it also is a maturing of CS. You're talking on the terms of the business and what you need, and the impact that customer success and the maturing and growing of your function is going to have on the business, not just what you need. I need another headcount. It's a very different way of thinking. And I think we're beginning to see more of this, which is really good.
Yeah, actually, Chris, I was going to ask, because I agree with that, is the way you put that makes so much sense. How frequently are you seeing those are the conversations people are actually having, or is that very few people are having those business-related questions and more people are still asking for the headcount?
Again, it goes back to how strong is the CCO. The best CCOs are using valuation as their North Star. I'd say VP director level CS leaders are definitely focused more on the 1 CSM per $2 million in revenue kind of argument. And they are going back to the CFO and saying, please give me budget for a Csops person, which of course, at that point, they sound more like a support leader asking for an additional headcount. It sounds like overhead, it sounds like an expense, and it's not connected to company outcomes. It really is about the maturity and the strength of the success leader. And I think you called out earlier at the beginning of the call, success is still relatively new. And while I think that's true, the concept of account management and customer retention has been around forever.
Yep.
So it's up to us to learn from the lessons of the early days of software, where account managers were responsible for going and selling 2.0 software disk, right, into an existing customer account. And so I think there are lots of lessons that have already been learned that we can draw from. I don't think we have to do this all from scratch. And I think there is some urgency to get better quickly.
I think you're so right there. And that is something that we've talked about before, Jason, is that this, although the term is new, the name customer success, we've been doing this forever. Mm-hmm. It's just a different way of thinking about it. And there are lots of things that we've already learned as to how to position this better. And I think it's now got a lot more visibility on the criticality of it. And yes, there have been changes in industry and business models that have made it more important. Chris, look, this has been a superb conversation. It's been so exciting to have you with us. Really, it is one of the topics that I love talking about. What we always like to do as part of our podcast is give our kind of guest what we call a bold challenge question. So the question for you is, what's the number one call to action for our listeners when it comes to customer success operations? So can you sum it up in one thing that they should be doing, thinking about?
Yeah. Oh boy, I only get to pick one.
We like to make them difficult.
Yeah.
Or the top one, not only one, but the top one, the most urgent thing. the two top ones?
The most important thing, the most important takeaway from this is that CS leaders should connect their CS ops function to departmental or business outcomes. And customer success ops, even in mature teams today, is not very well measured. So I asked every company, how do you bonus or how do you compensate your CS ops person? What metrics do you use? And only one company had something that was even remotely interesting in terms of a solution. And the problem for this, of course, is that at some point, CS ops leaders will be asked to justify the expense of the CS ops function. And so if CS ops leaders don't have a case for the value that's added by the team, that will come under attack by the CFO at some point in the future, that function.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway is, yes, of course, invest in CS ops. It's actually the key to unlocking this kind of new 2.0 world of thinking where you're driving cross-company decisions, you're influencing cross-company decisions that impact customer experience and churn. So it's the secret weapon of unlocking that, but also it's important for you as a CS leader to think forward about how you're going to justify the value. The best example that we heard of how to do that was to set up milestones of things that the CS ops will achieve for the CS team. Could be around efficiency, automation of systems, and then to survey the customer success team quarterly to ensure that the results of their work, the CS team is the customer of CS ops. So to make sure that CS feels good about the experience that they're getting, that they're working more efficiently, that their work has been automated, et cetera. I think there are better ways to do it, but that's a really good way to start.
Awesome. I love that. And I've seen things like that happen in other organizations. And I think it's such that way of thinking that actually their customer is the CS team. And I think it's a very different mindset. Chris, look, huge thank you. Before we go, do you want to give a shameless plug for nuffsaid and what you guys are doing for the listeners?
Yeah, so let's not talk about the product. I would just say nuffsaid from a marketing perspective, we generate a ton of content to help CS leaders solve the problems that are relevant to them today. So the most recent article is CS Ops, but we've covered the low-touch customer success, the tech touch model recently. We've got a very active blog. We post a lot on social media. We have a magazine that we publish twice a year. We do workshops on compensation and how to do a better job of negotiating for your own comp. So just think of nuffsaid from a marketing perspective as a partner to you and helping you level up your operations, your personal compensation, your impact in customer success. And so that's how we would like to be seen and perceived by the customer success community.
Awesome. I've got a copy of your book here, Chris, of the magazine. Sorry, it's a phenomenal read. It's enjoyable to read as well. It's a really good way of writing it.
Great.
Thanks very much. And of course, love getting time with the two Jasons. So thanks as always for including me.
Excellent. Now, Chris, look, a huge thank you for joining us. We've really enjoyed this.